World War II, the Battle of Kohima. On March 4, 1944, the Japanese forces in Burma launched Operation Yugo against the British forces in India. Japan wanted to deal a severe blow to the British in northeastern India, which could have instigated an uprising by Indian nationalists. It was planned for the Japanese offensive to follow the fastest route from Burma to India, the road to Dimapur. The two main objectives along the operation path were the towns of Imphal and Kohima. The latter was an important communication center through which the British forces on the Indian-Burmese front line were supplied. From April to June 1944, Kohima was the scene of one of the most bitterly fought battles in the Asian theater of war. Due to the ferocity of the battles and the resistance shown by the British troops in defending their positions, historians named the Battle of Kohima the Stalingrad of the East. Allied troops had defended their positions from well-dug-in trenches for 2 long weeks before launching a counterattack. Probably the most severe fighting went on at the northeastern corner of the ridge. There, the fighting took place on a rather unusual battlefield, the tennis court. The Japanese launched the Yugo offensive on March 6, 1944. Most of their troops were engaged in surrounding the British forces at Imphal. The Japanese 31st Division, under the command of Lieutenant General Kotoko Sato, was sent north to attack the enemy position at Kohima Ridge. Japanese forces marched through thick jungle and over high mountains. After almost a month, they appeared on the Kohima Ridge. 12,000 soldiers had achieved what the British believed to be impossible. Despite considering the maneuver unfeasible, the British had prepared their defensive positions in advance along the entire ridge. In the early days of the Japanese Yugo offensive, the only troops stationed at Kohima were the Assam Rifles. In addition to these troops, the ridge was also defended by the 4th Battalion, Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment. The rest of the 161st Brigade was based in Jatsoma, including artillery support being provided to cover Kohima. However, parts of the 161st Indian Brigade had arrived as reinforcements before the Japanese arrival. The problem was that the Kohima Ridge was a series of steep hills that were a mile long but only a couple of hundred yards deep, allowing only 1 battalion to deploy. The men dug in down this narrow line of hills that were named after local garrison facilities. At the southernmost edge of the ridge was the GPT, or General Purpose Transports Ridge. Across the road was the Jail Ridge. Further south were DIS Spur, Daily Issue Supplies, FSD Ridge, Field Supply Depot, Kuki Piket, the Garrison Hill, and the IGH Spur, Indian General Hospital west of it. Along the ridge went the Imphal to Dimapur Road. North of Garrison Hill, the road bent westwards and climbed upward. On the northeast slopes of the Garrison Hill was the Deputy Commissioner's bungalow. Behind it, on a terrace nearly 40 feet higher, was an asphalt tennis court, with 2 additional terraces above that. The Japanese force arrived at the Kohima Ridge on April 6th, approaching from Imphal. In a swift attack, they seized the GPT Ridge and the Jail Ridge, from where they had a clear view of the rest of the Kohima Ridge. By the end of the day, the Japanese had overrun the entire road along the ridge. Next, they planned to attack the northeastern tip of the ridge. By capturing Garrison Hill, the Japanese would have had the British surrounded and virtually isolated. The Japanese 58th Regiment of the 31st Division launched a massive attack on April 8, 1944, preceded by a fierce bombardment onto the A Company, 4th Royal West Kent's position at the northeastern corner of Garrison Hill. 2 waves of Japanese attacks took place, one from the north and the other from the west. Even though they suffered heavy casualties, the Japanese didn't back down from securing a stronghold at the bungalow's end of the road. With reinforcements pouring in, the Japanese kept attacking. Unable to see the torrent of soldiers coming their way, and under constant barrage of mortar fire, men of the A Company withdrew to a higher position under covering fire from Bren machine guns. Japanese troops broke through toward the end of the bungalow terrace and occupied the area. 20 yards away, the British dug in on the western side of the tennis court. A 2-week nightmare had begun. The 9th of April was Easter Sunday, but there was no time to celebrate. Other members of A Company were sent down to the tennis court to reinforce the defenses. The situation was getting desperate for the defenders. At 10 p.m., a new Japanese attack began. The British positions were plastered with artillery shells before the enemy soldiers charged across the tennis court. However, the British artillery from Jatsoma now responded with equal ferocity. Their shells were falling just 20 yards from A Company's lines. Still, the Japanese kept attacking in waves, every half hour throughout the rest of the night. Located on a steep terrace above the Deputy Commissioner's bungalow, soldiers of A Company could not see the Japanese leaving their trenches. Only their war cries could be heard. Only once their heads protruded above the terraced ridge did the British open fire with everything they had. The Japanese were coming in such large numbers that there was no time to pick individual targets. Machine gunners just kept pouring fire onto the mass of men. During one of the attacks, a Scottish private picked up 3 automatic weapons from dead comrades and emptied one after another into incoming Japanese. Then he threw all of his grenades at them before resorting to hand-to-hand fighting with the enemy soldiers that had jumped into his trench. That night and the following 2 days, A Company managed to repel the Japanese onslaught. However, any hope of getting out alive was unlikely now, as they were getting low on ammo and other supplies. Because the road from Dimapur was closed, supplies were delivered to them by RAF Dakota transport aircraft. The complexity of the terrain and the proximity of enemy lines made this task extremely difficult. As a result, a lot of airdrops ended up in Japanese hands. On the evening of April 11th, men of B Company, 4th Royal West Kent, replaced the exhausted defenders of the tennis court. The newcomers experienced the ferocity of the battle on their very first night of the trenches. As usual, after a heavy artillery and mortar barrage, the Japanese attacked the positions. However, the men of B Company were ready to repel them. The British artillery responded with a counter barrage. Those Japanese soldiers that managed to break through to the British lines were mown down by fire from the British Bren guns. Private Leonard Brown was manning one of these in the forward position controlling the tennis court when he was showered by Japanese grenades. Disregarding his own safety, he stood up to get a better field of fire and kept firing on the enemy soldiers. While his comrades were dying around him, he stood there calling for more ammo and grenades. He was the last man standing in the trench. In front of him lay several dead Japanese soldiers. Unfortunately, he couldn't hold off the waves of incoming Japanese soldiers and was killed defending his position. Twice more that night, the Japanese attacked the British positions. They suffered horrendous casualties, but did get hold of the eastern side of the tennis court. The Japanese made one more attack before dawn. This time, the attack was not announced by artillery. Instead, a dozen Japanese soldiers wearing plimsolls instead of boots to conceal their movement charged the British line across the tennis court. The tactic was successful to a certain extent, as soldiers in the first-line trenches were totally caught by surprise. The main attack overran the British front positions, but the soldiers from the rear trenches managed to repel them. For 6 more days, the Japanese attacked relentlessly. Both sides were on the verge of exhaustion, with a constant lack of water, food, and ammunition. Having run out of ammo, both sides now began using their grenades in earnest. They were simply tossing them at each other across the tennis court as if a snowball fight was going on. A public relations officer of the Southeast Asia Command described it as if a grenade match was being played across the bungalow's tennis courts. On April 17th, the Japanese started a ferocious attack and gained control of FSD Hill and Kuki Piket, leaving the British in possession of an area measuring 350 by 350 yards on Garrison Hill and IGH Spur. Defeat was imminent, but the artillery at Jatsoma saved the day. British soldiers were told to keep their heads down as the heavy barrage shattered enemy forward positions. The sustained fire seemed to have stopped the Japanese, who gave up on attacking the British last stronghold. The following day, April 18th, the much-awaited reinforcements arrived. The British 2nd Infantry Division, with the help of tanks from the 33 Corps, broke through Japanese roadblocks to relieve the exhausted British troops at Kohima Ridge. At the tennis courts, positions were taken over by D Company of the 1st Battalion, 1st Punjab Regiment. The Japanese gave them a standard welcome. A barrage fire from artillery and mortars followed by an infantry attack. The Punjabis fought bravely and repelled every Japanese attack. In 4 days of bitter fighting, they lost 120 men. On April 21st, fresh troops of C Company, 1st Battalion Royal Berkshire Regiment of the 6th Brigade of the British 2nd Division took up their positions. The following day, they broke the Japanese siege and took the initiative. From then on, it was the Japanese who were defending their positions. The British tanks and the artillery did most of the job in defeating the enemy, who were well dug in and capable of holding out. Finally, on May 13th, the assault by M3 Grant 75mm tanks firing at the Japanese bunkers from nigh on point-blank range and supported by soldiers from the Dorset Regiment resulted in the seizure of the tennis court and the Deputy Commissioner's bungalow. The Battle of the Tennis Court was over. On May 31st, the Japanese 31st Division commander, Lieutenant General Kotoko Sato, ordered the withdrawal from the Kohima Ridge. This was despite orders from high command to hold his positions. The Battle of Kohima ended on June 2, 1944. The British position in India was saved. The Japanese suffered an utter defeat that changed the tides of the war in Asia. After the event, Sato was invited to commit seppuku, or ritual suicide, by his superiors, but he declined the offer and demanded a court-martial to clear his name and also to expose the incompetence at Army HQ. It was decided that he had suffered a breakdown and was unfit to stand trial. The Battle of Kohima is believed to be one of the most significant Allied victories of World War II, and also the most decisive action of the Burma campaign, with the Battle of the Tennis Court undoubtedly its most heroic chapter.
Hey, it's Chris Kane. You're probably used to hearing me during one of our advertising spots, but today I want to talk about something a little bit different. Every video that we create is more than just content. It's a blend of research, of creativity, of passion for history. We do it because we believe in the power of history, because its lessons, its stories, and its ability to connect everybody is what we're all about. Sometimes the reality of operating a YouTube channel presents challenges in the form of demonetization occasionally, which impacts the ability to produce content that we're passionate about. Now we're looking at you, our amazing audience, to ask for your support in keeping the channel, our shared passion, alive and thriving. We're inviting you to join us on Patreon and contribute to the ongoing creation of our content. By joining us on Patreon, you're doing more than just supporting our content. You're becoming an integral part of the community, and we're dedicated to preserving and promoting history. Remember, every bit of support makes a real difference. If you'd like to learn more about how you can help, please visit the link in the description below. Thank you, as always, for your interest and your hunger for history.